Welcome, everybody, at another episode of the Wrestling vs. the World podcast. If you're enjoying your day, sweet. If not, what the hell ever. I had a feeling I was going to regret this episode just because of how much work is going to get put into this. I've discussed all of the title changes that happened within the WWF in 1999, and today, it's going to be time to cover everything in 2001. This was a lot. I'm going to make this quick disclaimer. The order that I go in is based on dates and everything, so it's not going to be... Some title changes are going to be a little bit out of order based on when they happen on the show. So, like, some title changes may happen at the beginning of the show and another one happen later the night. I'm not going to go into that specific, be that specific or anything like that. Also, when it comes to the dates of these shows, it's going to be based on when they happen / aired. So, if they happen on a house show, it'll be that exact date. But when it comes to, SmackDowns or Heats, if they've been pre-taped, then the dates of these will be mentioned on will be based on when they aired. So, just for that sake. So we're going to start off Royal Rumble 2001. The Dudley Boys would defeat Edge and Christian to become the WWF Tag Team Champions. That same night as well, Chris Jericho would successfully defeat Chris Benoit to win the Intercontinental Championship in a ladder match. Following night, January 22nd, 2001, we would get two title changes on Raw. First of all, Test would defeat William Regal to win the European Championship, and for the Hardcore Championship side, Al Snow would defeat Raven to win the Hardcore Championship, only to then lose it right back to Raven that same night. Now we got some house show matches to bring up. On the February 3rd, 2001 house show, K-Quick would win the Hardcore Championship, followed by Crash Holly winning the championship, and then the championship going right back to Raven before the end of that night. The next night, for the next house show, the exact same thing. K-Quick would win the Hardcore Championship, followed by Crash Holly, and then right back to Raven. 4 days later, on the February 8, 2001 episode of SmackDown, Hardcore Holly would defeat Raven to win the Hardcore Championship, only to lose it right back to Raven that very same evening. 2 days later, February 10, 2001 house show. Hardcore Holly would win the Hardcore Championship from Raven, only to then lose it right back to him that same night again. The next night, February 11, 2001 house show. Hardcore Holly would win the Hardcore Championship, followed by by Al Snow, and then right back to Raven again. All because of this 24/7 rule. 6 days later, February 17, 2001 house show. Steve Blackman would win the Hardcore Championship from Raven, only to then lose it right back to him that same night. No Way Out 2001. Billy Gunn would win the Hardcore Championship during the scheduled Raven vs. Big Show match to become Hardcore Champion, only for Raven to quickly regain it right afterwards, followed by Big Show walking out of the match as Hardcore Champion. And then that same night in the main event, The Rock would defeat Kurt Angle to win the WWF Championship. Gonna jump ahead a bit to March 5th, 2001. Hardy Boys would defeat the Dudley Boys to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. 13 days later, in a rarity we would see on the March 18, 2001 episode of Sunday Night Heat, Crash Holly would defeat Dean Malenko to win the Light Heavyweight Championship. Title changes didn't happen on that show very often. The next night, March 19, 2001, we had a few title changes. Raven would defeat the Big Show to win the Hardcore Championship. Edge and Christian would defeat the Hardy Boys to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. And then immediately afterwards, the Dudley Boys would defeat Edge and Christian to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. Now we get to WrestleMania 17. First of all, Kane would defeat Raven and the Big Show in a triple threat hardcore match to win the Hardcore Championship. Eddie Guerrero would defeat Test to win the European Championship. Chyna would defeat Ivory to win the Women's Championship. Edge and Christian would defeat the Dudley Boys and the Hardy Boys in a TLC match to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. And Stone Cold Steve Austin would defeat The Rock in a no disqualification match to win the WWF Championship. Now get to the April 5th, 2001 episode of SmackDown. Triple H would defeat Chris Jericho to win the Intercontinental Championship. 7 days later, on the April 12, 2001 episode of SmackDown, Jeff Hardy in a surprise win would defeat Triple H to win the Intercontinental Championship. But then 4 days later, on the April 16, 2001 episode of Raw, Triple H would defeat Jeff Hardy to regain the Intercontinental Championship. 3 days later, April 19, 2001 episode of SmackDown, we get two title changes on this evening. The Brothers of the Destruction would defeat Edge and Christian to win the WWF Tag Team Championships, while Rhino would defeat Kane to win his Hardcore Championship. The following week, April 26, 2001 episode of SmackDown, Matt Hardy would defeat Eddie Guerrero to win the European Championship. 3 days later on Sunday Night Heat, Jerry Lynn would defeat Crash Holly to win the Light Heavyweight Championship. That same evening, later on during the pay-per-view of Backlash 2001, the two-man power trip would defeat the Brothers of the Destruction to win the WWF Tag Team Championships in a winner-take-all match. The next month, so we would get a bit of a break from title changes, Judgment Day 2001, Kane would defeat Triple H in a chain match to win the Intercontinental Championship. The next night, May 21st, 2001 episode of Raw, Big Show would defeat Rhino to win the Hardcore Championship, and Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho would defeat Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin two-man power trip to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. The following week, on the May 28th, 2001 episode of Raw, Chris Jericho would defeat Big Show to win the Hardcore Championship, a forgotten moment there, only to then immediately lose it to Rhino shortly thereafter upon getting onto the entrance ramp of the Raw set. Now we get to June 7, 2001 episode of SmackDown. Jeff Hardy would defeat Jerry Lynn to win the Light Heavyweight Championship. Next up, June 14, 2001 episode of SmackDown. Test would defeat Rhino to win the Hardcore Championship. Then 7 days later, on the June 21st, 2001 episode of SmackDown, the Dudley Boys would defeat Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. 4 days later, on the June 25th, 2001 episode of Raw, we would get two more title changes. X-Pac would defeat Jeff Hardy to win the Light Heavyweight Championship, and Rhino would defeat Test to win the Hardcore Championship, only to then lose it right afterwards to the debuting Mike Awesome to become the new Hardcore Champion. 3 days later on SmackDown, June 28, 2001, Albert would defeat Kane to win the Intercontinental Championship. Now you get to the month of July. July 5th, 2001 episode of SmackDown, as we get through the Invasion and get some WCW Championship title changes going on. Billy Kidman would defeat Shane Helms to win the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. 4 days later on the July 9, 2001 episode of Raw, the APA would defeat the Dudley Boys to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. And then 3 days later on SmackDown, Jeff Hardy would defeat Mike Awesome to win the Hardcore Championship. Then you get to Invasion. Rob Van Dam would successfully defeat Jeff Hardy in a Hardcore match to become the new Hardcore Champion. After this, on the July 23rd, 2001 episode of Raw, Lance Storm would defeat Albert to win the Intercontinental Championship. 3 days later, July 26, 2001 episode of SmackDown. Two title changes here. First of all, Booker T would hand over the WCW United States Championship to Chris Kanyon, and then later that night, Kurt Angle would defeat Booker T to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And then 4 days later, first of all, Booker T, on the July 30th, 2001 episode of Raw, Booker T would defeat Kurt Angle to win back the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and X-Pac would defeat Billy Kidman to win / kind of unify the Cruiserweight Championships with his Light Heavyweight Championship, although both championships would still be recognized as being defended as having active lineages on their own. The next week, August 6, 2001 episode of Raw, Tajiri would defeat X-Pac to win the Light Heavyweight Championship, separating it from the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. 3 days later, August 9, 2001 SmackDown. Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Kanyon would defeat the APA to win the WWF Tag Team Championships, while the Brothers of Destruction would defeat the Natural Born Thrillers, being Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo, to win the WCW Tag Team Championships. 4 days later on Raw, August 13, 2001, Jeff Hardy would defeat Rob Van Dam during a title defense against Kurt Angle to win the Hardcore Championship due to the 24/7 rule. Then you get to SummerSlam. First of all, Edge would defeat Lance Storm to win the Intercontinental Championship. X-Pac would defeat Tajiri to win / once again unify, quote-unquote, the Light Heavyweight and Cruiserweight Championships, but still, the championships would be counted as being separate, but still double champion type of ordeal. Rob Van Dam would defeat Jeff Hardy in a ladder match to win the Hardcore Championship. The Brothers of Destruction would defeat Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Kanyon in a tag team steel cage match to win the WWF Tag Team Championships, alongside while defending their WCW Tag Team Championships, but both belts still, once again, being declared as being actively independent on their own. And The Rock would defeat Booker T to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. August 27, 2001 episode of Raw, the Hurricane would defeat Matt Hardy to become the new European Champion. A couple of weeks later, on the September 10, 2001 episode of Raw, Tajiri would defeat Chris Kanyon to win the WCW United States Championship, while also that same night, Kurt Angle would defeat Rob Van Dam to win the Hardcore Championship, but would lose it right back to him right afterwards, thanks to interference by Stone Cold throwing him off the stage. 7 days later, September 17, 2001 episode of Raw, the Dudley Boys would defeat the Brothers of Destruction to win the WWF Tag Team Championships, thus separating them from the WCW Tag Team Championships. Unforgiven 2001, Christian would defeat Edge to win the Intercontinental Championship. Rhino would defeat Tajiri to win the WCW United States Championship. And Kurt Angle would defeat Stone Cold Steve Austin to win the WWF Championship. Now, later that same week, the September 20th, or a little bit later on, September 27, 2001 episode of SmackDown, Booker T and Test would defeat the Brothers of Destruction to win the WCW Tag Team Championships. Now we get into October. First of all, October 8th, 2001 episode of Raw, the Hardy Boys would defeat Booker T and Test to win the WCW Tag Team Championships, and then that same night, Stone Cold Steve Austin would defeat Kurt Angle to regain the WWF Championship. 3 days later, Billy Kidman would defeat, on the October 11, 2001 episode of SmackDown, Billy Kidman would defeat X-Pac to win the Cruiserweight Championship, thus separating it from the Light Heavyweight Championship, and then shortly thereafterwards, X-Pac would disappear from television, and the Light Heavyweight Championship would be quietly retired the next year, due to X-Pac being away due to injury. No Mercy 2001. Edge would defeat Christian in a ladder match to win the Intercontinental Championship, and Chris Jericho that night would also defeat The Rock to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The following night, we get a bunch of title changes for an episode of Raw. First of all, October 22nd, 2001, Tajiri would defeat Billy Kidman to win the Cruiserweight Championship, and during this title reign, eventually, the Cruiserweight Championship would be renamed after Survivor Series from being the WCW Cruiserweight Championship to the WWF Cruiserweight Championship. Also that same night, Kurt Angle would defeat Rhino to win the WCW United States Championship. Bradshaw would defeat the Hurricane to become European Champion, and Chris Jericho and The Rock would defeat the Dudley Boys to become WWF Tag Team Champions. 3 days later, October 25th, 2001 episode of SmackDown, the Dudley Boys would defeat the Hardy Boys to win the WCW Tag Team Championships. Now, November 1st, 2001, we have 3 big things happen on this day in terms of recognition. First of all, on that day, the Women's Championship would become officially vacated due to Chyna's departure from the company, even though we hadn't seen her since Judgment Day. Also that night, later on in SmackDown, Booker T and Test would defeat Chris Jericho and The Rock to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. And in a match that was finally revealed and uploaded to WWE's YouTube or Facebook page, Christian would defeat Bradshaw to win the European Championship. So lost media has been recently found as of last year. 4 days later, the November 5th, 2001 episode of Raw, Test would defeat Edge to win the Intercontinental Championship. And later on that night, The Rock would defeat Chris Jericho to win the WCW Championship. And during this title reign, as we remember, after Survivor Series, the WCW Championship would later be renamed the World Championship, courtesy of Vince McMahon. 7 days later, the November 12, 2001 episode of Raw, Edge would defeat Kurt Angle to win the WCW United States Championship. And the Hardy Boys would defeat Booker T and Test to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. Now you get to Survivor Series, where the Alliance Invasion storyline finally came to an end. First of all, Trish Stratus would win a six-pack challenge to win the vacant WWF Women's Championship. Edge would defeat Test in order to win the Intercontinental Championship and retain his WCW United States Championship, unifying both belts and retiring the WCW United States Championship until it was brought back in 2003 under the WWE banner. And also, the Dudley Boys would defeat the Hardy Boys in a tag team steel cage match to win the WWF Tag Team Championships and retaining their WCW Tag Team Championships, permanently unifying both belts and retiring the WCW Tag Team Championships for good. And then you get to the end. Vengeance 2001, we had a few title changes here as well. The Undertaker would defeat Rob Van Dam to win the Hardcore Championship. Chris Jericho would defeat The Rock to win the World Championship. And then Chris Jericho would then defeat Stone Cold Steve Austin to win the WWF Championship, unifying it with the World Championships and retiring the World Championships permanent lineage once and for all. So yeah, that's a lot of championships changing hands all of a sudden there in 2001 when you include the Light Heavyweight Championship, which didn't change hands back in the 1999 episode that I talked about, and you include all these WCW Championship title changes, the 24/7 rule going on, some house show matches, and just a lot of flip-flopping in terms of just hot potatoing these belts during the Invasion storylines. Absolute madness. Wouldn't you agree? I hope so. So anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What did you think about all of these title changes that we saw in 2001? I'm probably going to put in the description of how many title changes it was overall, because I do not feel like adding them up right now. So anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's episode, folks, please remember, leave a like, subscribe to the bell, turn on if you're listening to this on YouTube, or follow if you're listening to this podcast on any other service that this podcast is available on. And I'll catch you all in the next episode. Thanks for listening, folks. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out, and good day, everybody.